Tonight, Nigel Farage's Reform UK looms large on the eve of the local elections. Keir Starmer started the day with what appeared to be an unwelcome intervention from Tony Blair on net zero. Limiting fossil fuels is doomed to fail, warned the former Prime Minister, before putting out another statement insisting he does support Labour's plans. But both Labour and the Conservatives appear to be trying to fend off mounting pressure from Reform. Nigel Farage has just been speaking to our political editor, Beth Rigby. We'll hear what he's had to say in a moment. Plus, I'll be speaking to the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, on the polls, net zero, and whether the law for young drivers needs changing. And it's been more than 6,500 days since Tony Blair left office. We'll have a look back at a few of his interventions since then. In our office and preparing their interventions, Nadine Zahawi and Carla Denyer, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Oh, good evening. Well, it's the day before the local elections, and really my last chance to be able to talk about them before we all get locked down into polling day and the rules about what broadcasters can and can't discuss. And look, it's a funny set of elections because the Conservatives are defending way more seats than anyone else, so it will be a big test for Kemi Badenoch, and really the first real verdict at the ballot box since she became leader of the Conservatives. But for me, tomorrow is really about reform. Do they have the organisation to translate votes and support into seats? Because if they can, that's going to have huge consequences, not just for this set of local elections, but also the next general election as well. And look, you can tell the other parties are worried because while Reform only managed to win 5 seats at the general election, they've had an outsized impact on politics already. Take foreign aid.
And the foreign aid budget, so much of which is spent to simply meet political targets, so much of which is spent in ways that we would not approve of. We propose cutting the foreign aid budget. All in all, you see there savings of 200 billion sterling.
And so today I've decided that we will fund the initial increase in defence spending by cutting our spending on overseas development, moving from 0.5% of GNI to 0.3%.
So Nigel Farage in 2019, Keir Starmer earlier this year. That's just one example. Net zero is another.
Net zero madness is closing down factories, is closing down industry on a scale we couldn't have even believed.
Net zero by 2050 is impossible. I don't say that with pleasure. I want a better future and a better environment for our children, but we have to get real.
Now, of course, you could argue that these changes would have happened regardless of Reform, that the parties are just following shifting voter sentiment and changing political consensus. But if Reform have a good night tomorrow, winning votes from both Labour and the Conservatives, well, you can expect to see Nigel Farage's party setting the political narrative even more. Well, we're kicking off the show outside. You might have noticed a bit of a difference for us. We're at the Sky Pad tonight, where we can be looking at the last Prime Minister's questions before the local elections. The parties were very much in campaign mode. We're joined, of course, by our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue. But Ali, we're talking first about this guy, aren't we, and an intervention he's made.
Yeah, that's right. Remember him. Is he at odds with the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, on climate? Because in the Tony Blair Institute, he has written this report. He has, in a Tony Blair Institute report, he's written this. Sorry, Sophie, I can't get my words out properly. People are being asked to make financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle when they know that their impact on global emissions is minimal. And he goes on to say, any strategy based on either phasing out fossil fuels in the short term or limiting consumption is a strategy doomed to fail. That does not sound like the Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister at the moment, who is talking about net zero by 2050, who is talking about replacing fossil fuels. But both sides are at pains to say that there is no disagreement. We've had clarification from the Tony Blair Institute saying they agree with the government. I asked the Prime Minister's spokesperson about that, whether that was after a conversation with Sir Keir Starmer. They said they don't get into private conversations. But look, there is a bit of political difficulty here because this is something that the Conservatives and Reform you mentioned it there, are pushing hard on. They see a big dividing line here.
Yeah, the timing of it as well. And Ali, I'll be honest, I thought this would come up at Prime Minister's questions.
So did I.
It didn't?
Yeah, so did I. I thought it would be what Kemi Badenoch decided to use her questions on. There was a real feel of kind of local election eve at Prime Minister's questions. I thought plenty of places being mentioned that we won't go into, but yeah, it did feel...
the rules are.
It felt very sparky. And Kemi Badenoch did choose to go on one of her other preferred subjects. Have a listen to this.
The Safeguarding Minister admitted on the floor of the House that there was a cover-up of the child rape gang scandal. Does the Prime Minister think we should expose this cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a serious issue. I oversaw the first grooming gang prosecution, which was in Rochdale more than a decade ago. There is a contrast here because the Leader of the Opposition, when she was Minister for Children, Women and Equalities, never raised this issue in the House in 3 years.
So that was Kemi Badenoch. This is Nigel Farage.
Young, undocumented males have illegally crossed the English Channel into our country. A 40% increase on this time last year. Many coming from cultures that are somewhat alien to ours. In Runcorn alone, there are 750 of these young men. Just in Runcorn. Is it not time to admit that Smash the Gangs was nothing more than an election slogan and not a policy? And isn't it time to declare a national emergency and to act accordingly?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are passing a borders bill with extensive powers to smash the gangs. And let's be clear what a vote for his party means. It means a vote to charge for the NHS. It means a pro-Putin foreign policy and a vote against workers' rights. And now we hear, Mr. Speaker, he's recruited Liz Truss as his new top advisor, as he was cheering on the mini-budget.
That was Nigel Farage, and this is Ed Davey, who spotted quite a unique opportunity, I think, on Donald Trump. Here you go.
Learned what happens when you do a trade deal with President Trump. He can't be trusted to stick with it. The Prime Minister didn't answer my question last week, and he didn't answer my honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, just now. So let me ask again. Will the government give members of this House a vote on the floor of this House on any deal he agrees with President Trump?
So, kind of run of their greatest hits, Nigel Farage pushing on immigration, Ed Davey on Donald Trump there. It was quite a scattergun PMQs, did feel very lively, and rightly so, because we're on the eve of, the first big democratic rush since Keir Starmer came into power. We'll find out get a bit of a sense of what the public really think.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating, wouldn't it, Ali? Thank you so much for talking us through all that, Ali Fortescue there. Right, I'm going to hop it over here to bring in our, shoes falling off, our duo for this evening, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Nadeem Zahawi and the co-leader of the Green Party, that's Carla Denyer. Great to have you both here. Let's talk about net zero, shall we? I'm interested in your take on this, Carla, because you've got Tony Blair. I mean, I was going to say Tony Blair on one side, Labour on the other. They wouldn't see it like that, obviously. But what's your reaction to what we've been talking about today?
I mean, what a surprise. A guy who was a lobbyist for several petro-states is taking the side of fossil fuels over tackling net zero, reaching net zero, sorry. I think this is another dodgy dossier from Tony Blair, and it's disappointing, but not terribly surprising. He tried to claim that getting to net zero isn't realistic, but what he's not telling people, and this is what made his report incredibly bad timing, is that within a few hours of his report coming out, one came out from the government's official climate change advisors, the Climate Change Committee, that showed that we already have a lot of climate change locked in that is going to happen, is going to affect people here in the UK. We already have a lot of people affected, flooded out of their homes, even horrendous, already thousands of deaths every year from extreme heat. And this report showed that within the next 25 years, we are looking at a quarter of UK homes potentially affected by flooding, and one half of roads and railways vulnerable to flooding, and potentially 10,000 deaths a year from extreme heat. And that report was really clear that the government is not doing enough. So the unrealistic thing, I would say to Tony Blair, is failing to act. And I'm really, really worried that Keir Starmer in PMQs said that Tony Blair's report is absolutely aligned with what the government are doing. Well, if they're absolutely aligned with a former petrostate lobbyist, then we've got a problem here.
What's your take on all this?
I think Carla's got a problem, because if you look at the local elections coming up tomorrow, Bristol City Council is looking at monthly bin collections.
That's true. That's
Brighton City Council is looking at meat-free Mondays, right? People understand that global warming is a real issue, a bit like the pandemic, right? But it needs a coordinated global response, because the UK being in 1 or 2% of overall emissions, making people, have their rubbish at home for 4 weeks, or not eat meat, or see their energy bills rising, or see industry failing.
They're not forcing people to not eat meat, are
I'm
they?
just saying to you, I'm just saying that people are sensible. Where Kemi recognised this and homed in on it, and I think, to be fair, Nigel did as well, is look, like the pandemic, we need a global response. There's no point the UK putting its people in huge pain, right,
What a load of
for
nonsense.
nothing to happen other than we import more gas from Qatar or from elsewhere, when we have our own gas assets in the UK. You need gas because you need base load, right? Without base load, you have a problems of blackouts, right? What is the point of us not exploiting our own gas and importing it, much bigger footprint, right? That people understand it. And the great thing about what Kemi said is, look, let's talk about the difficult things. Let's be honest with the nation. And I hope that pays off for her tomorrow.
I can tell you, just very, very briefly, because it's a bit gone, if you want to...
What a load of culture war nonsense. Oh, my God, I don't know where to start.
Hold on a second. Do you not agree with me that it is a foolish thing to do to hurt people in their pockets with their taxes,
Well, the culture
to not
war
deliver your
nonsense
own,
is you
to not deliver
presenting all
your
this
own
misinformation.
gas assets, right? You need
Okay,
baseload
shall I
until
answer?
you build your nuclear capability to
answer?
deliver baseload, because there's no other way of delivering baseload, right, other than gas
Nadine,
or nuclear.
I'm an energy professional. I worked in the
I'm a
renewable
chemical
energy
engineer as
sector.
well, so I can tell you, I think we can't disagree that baseload has to be delivered, right?
Actually, the idea of there needing to be a solid baseload is quite an outdated position, because now that we have better storage technologies and we have demand-side management, which is all where smart meters and where industrial users can be paid to fluctuate their demand, that need for baseload is much less than it used to be.
Much less, but you still need baseload, right?
Especially where renewable energy is variable but predictable,
you still
so
need,
you can track.
need baseload.
Can I just say...
Yes or no? Do you need baseload or not? Come on, Carl, tell the truth.
The need for it is much less, and
So you
that
still
can
need
be
it?
achieved with,
So you
with
still-
green
so
energy.
you're
Well,
admitting you need it?
I can tell you two are going to be sparky tonight. I think I might...
I'm not going to put up with
I'm going to have to get my referee. I need to get my referee whistle
just
out.
admitted you need baseload. If you need baseload...
She said you need less base load. You say... anyway,
Okay, so...
you guys are going to have to take this outside. I'm not going to have time for the rest of the programme.
Can I just come back on the really, frankly, dangerous, misleading comment that Nadine made about pain? Because actually, policies that reduce our carbon emissions overwhelmingly also reduce our bills. They give us warmer, more comfortable homes. They give us cleaner air. Air pollution's a terrible problem in this country.
Okay.
It's killing hundreds of people, thousands of people every year. These policies are good for our health and
I'm
our
going to have to get my
society, and
sharp
it's
elbows
just
out at this point.
misleading.
Lots more from both of you. Don't worry, you're going to have lots more to come, because on the campaign trail in Stafford right now is Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, with Nigel Farage. And Beth, you've been speaking to him on his last interview of the campaign. What's he been saying?
That's right, Sophie. I'm at the final rally. Nigel Farage is behind me. I've had to come outside of the room to talk to you because it's absolutely packed in here. He really is the man of the moment. Elections this week, a series of firsts. The first test for Cammy Badenoch at the ballot box, the first verdict on Keir Starmer's government from voters. But also the really big story, I think, will be about reform and whether they can turn themselves from being a protest party, if you like, to one with real power, governing in mayoralties and perhaps in local councils. There's 18 Conservative councils out of the 23 battling to retain their seats, and Nigel Farage clearly thinks he's going to take control of some of them and win hundreds of council seats. He told me tonight he's optimistic about winning the Runcorn by-election. He thinks he's nailed on to take the whole mayoralty. He thinks he could take the Lincolnshire mayoralty too. And I think that this could potentially be a really historic set of elections. A quarter of those eligible to vote across the UK. In England, they will be voting a quarter, 11 million people on Friday. But they could be historic because we could really see the death, if you like, of the two-party system as Reform do really well, and Watch too for the Greens and also the Liberal Democrats. So lots of questions for Nigel Farage. How successful to be? What does he think the biggest risk for him is? Interestingly, he said it's delivery, that if he's promising to be the change and then they win power and don't deliver, well, what will the voters make of that? On the NHS, I asked him again some of Keir Starmer's remarks about wanting to pay for the NHS. He said, at the point of view, he said that's not true, but he also said he doesn't think the NHS should be funded from general taxation, and in the UK, people are not getting the bang for the buck as they do in Europe. So there's a big policy debate there on the NHS, on immigration, and I think as time goes on and Reform potentially do have a very successful set of elections and become, in a way, a governing party in pockets of the country, certainly with real power, there's going to be much more assessment and scrutiny of policy. But for now, here are his supporters, and they are bullish. Should we have a listen to the interview we did a bit earlier? Nigel Farage, it's the eve of polling. You're at your final rally. Your rivals like to say that Reform is still a protest party. Is that about to change? Are you going to be running councils and mayoralties by Friday?
We're not a protest party. You won't see people in this room in a minute sticking two fingers up and shouting. You'll see happy optimism. We believe that different leadership, different political thinking can turn the country around. So whilst we're pessimistic about the state of the country, we're optimistic about turning it around. How are we going to do, is your question. I don't know any more than you do. What I do think is this: we've had a very, very good 4 or 5 weeks.
Expectations on you are massive. There's an expectation that you are going to win the Lincolnshire mayoralty, maybe win in Hull, that you're going to take hundreds of seats from the Conservatives and others in council elections, that you're going to win the Runcorn by-election. Is there part of you that think, God, I won't meet the moment?
Well, I said at the start of the campaign that my objectives were to win minimum 200 seats.
Right.
And to run Labour as close as we possibly could in the Runcorn and Helpy
And how do you
by-election.
think that's going to go, Runcorn?
I think it's tight, but you know what? I do feel optimistic about it.
You think you're going to take it?
I guess as a party leader, you have to be optimistic.
No, I saw Keir Starmer on Monday, and he said it was very tough and seemed not that optimistic.
I'm feeling more optimistic with every day that passes.
Are you going to be there on Friday morning?
I certainly will be. I'll be there Thursday night. I'll be there all the way through. As for the rest of it, I think national vote share, we're going to do very, very well. I think mayoralties, I think we'll win 2, maybe 3.
And which ones are those? Lincolnshire, Hull?
Hull will win.
Hull?
Yeah, I think, getting a former gold medal winner, from the Olympics, local lad, local hero, I'm very confident of that. I'm reasonably confident that Dame Andrew Jenkins will win in Lincolnshire. And I think Doncaster, spin a coin, but we certainly have a chance. What is for certain is this. 9 months ago, just after the general election, we had virtually no branches. We had no vetting procedure in place, as I remember, perhaps even better than you do, from the general election. We have managed to put into the field more vetted candidates than any other party, and we're competing.
To govern is to choose. And it might be that you win these mayoralties, that you win control, or you get loads of councillors. There's 18 Conservative-held councils out of 23. Yeah. They could lose control of all of them. Kemi Badenoch told me yesterday it's up to local councillors to decide whether to team up with Reform councillors and do deals on the ground in order to run councils. Would you allow that as well? She said she's comfortable with that.
We've got some tough conditions, and the conditions are very simple. Number one, the auditors must come in. Why is money being spent? Why are these county councils spending millions on consultants, on agency workers? And number two, we will insist, if a cooperation is to be formed with any party, that county councils get back to what they're there for.
But you will do deals. You're happy for reform to do local deals with the Conservatives?
Only if our conditions are met, that county councils stop fighting climate change, things like that.
So you found something to agree with Kemi Badenoch on?
I don't think so, really, do you?
What about Labour? Would you do talks with Labour?
Yes, of course.
You would? OK. That's good to know, thank you. Just quickly, Canadian Conservatives, they've just lost what was weeks ago a nearly unlosable election to the Liberals, in part through their association with Trump. Are you shaken by that?
I'm shocked that, Trump normally says, this is what I'll do in government, and then does it. Quite where the 51st state of
this
America...
was him saying that
Canada should be annexed, effectively. Where that came from, I have absolutely no idea.
Does it worry you, though? Does it make you think
well,
you're
it worries me that the King is the head of state in Canada, yeah.
But does it make you feel like he could be a liability to you? Not your closeness to him actually could hurt you with voters?
Not really, because our interests are similar, but they're not symmetrical. And we still have an American president who is pro-British, who wants to come to a good trade deal with us, which I hope we arrive at, but I worry that Keir Starmer's reset with the EU is going to make that very difficult.
Do you think you need to distance from Trump a bit, though? He's the most unpopular president, according to polling.
I'm not dishonest. I'm not dishonest. I never try and pretend to be what I'm not. I'm a friend of his. I admire what he's done on the southern border. I admire what he's done on the war on woke. But I do scratch my head about some of the other foreign policy decisions.
OK, just a couple more things. Starmer says that you want to charge to use the NHS, do you?
It's a Labour lie. This is the Labour lie machine. I have never said anything of the kind. What I have said is the way that because we all pay. Through our taxes, we all pay for the NHS.
This is December 2024 from The Telegraph. This is you. The funding of the NHS is a total failure. The French do it much better with less funding. There's a lesson there. If you can afford it, you pay. If you can't, you don't. It works incredibly well. The French have a statutory health system levied from a mix of contributions from earned income and unearned income. You know, the central government funding and a little bit of a top-up fee. That's what's made Labour or allowed Labour to levy this charge.
Well, if Labour are upset that the rich might have to pay for healthcare, I find that a very odd position for it to be in.
Just to be clear, do you want it still funded through general taxation, or you think you need to look at the funding model?
I do not want it funded through general taxation.
Right, okay.
It doesn't work.
Okay.
It's not working. We're getting worse bang for the buck than any other country, particularly out of those European neighbours. I want it free at the point of delivery, but it's how we get there. And I'll tell you something, where Starmer is out of touch, and Labour are out of touch on this, as many other issues, most people out there in the real world know the NHS isn't working.
You're on the cusp of a seismic shift in our politics. We are moving potentially from the two-party system genuinely to a multi-party system. And it's not just you. Tomorrow it's also the Greens and the Lib Dems. What's your greatest risk? What's the biggest risk for you as this changes potentially?
The biggest risk is succeeding at winning mayoralties, perhaps winning control of county councils, and not delivering.
Not delivering, then it going wrong.
And then if we don't deliver, they'll say they're just like the Labour.
Why do you worry about not delivering? What is it? Not
because
the right people,
is the
not
trust.
The right structure?
No.
Not the right policies?
That is the trust that needs to be re-established in this country. One of the main reasons we're doing so well at the moment, maybe I'm doing so well at the moment, is because we've lost faith completely in the two parties that have basically dominated our lives since the end of the First World War. People want us because we represent change. We're going to do very, very well in these elections. Of that, I have no doubt. If we win county councils and mayoralties, we also have to deliver. And I get that, I understand that, and that'll be our focus.
Nigel Farage there speaking to Beth Rigby after having already spoken to Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch this week. Now, if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can see those interviews, plus everything you need to know about the English elections tomorrow. And of course, we're going to have full coverage of the local elections on Thursday from midnight, and I'm going to be with you on Friday to take you through the day. And, deep breath, we've also got a special extended Friday night politics hub for you as well. Basically, we've got you covered. Right. We're back in our main studio. The duo are back with us as well. Nadine, what did you make of what Nigel Farage was saying to Beth there?
He's a phenomenal communicator. What he's great at is homing in on, what the pinch points are, where the pain is in the nation, and then articulating, that brilliantly. I think he's less good at offering real solutions, and I think that's where I see Kemi has real potential. The problem for Kemi, and I remember these elections 4 years ago, because we had the vaccine bounce, and I was then coming out of the vaccine minister, becoming Secretary of State for Education. So it's a high watermark for the Conservative Party, and therefore it's worth, when you do your analysis post-election, as you will do on the hub, to remember that actually what we had was incredible results for the Conservative Party, and therefore it is bound to be a disappointment on Friday. I think the difficulty for Nigel is, albeit the Rupert Lowe stuff hasn't really stuck, because no one really knows who Rupert Lowe is. He's done well in Parliament. I think he's probably been one of the newbies, probably best performers in Parliament. I was certainly impressed by him. But that sort of division hasn't really cut through. Countries don't really recognise Rupert Lowe. But I say it's a sort of really sort of double-edged sword, because what Nigel also knows deep down, and you heard it right at the end there, is he doesn't have real capacity in people who've had experience of running local or national government. And if he can't run 5 MPs, how is he going to run 326 MPs? It'd be chaos, right? Out of 5, 20% are, at the moment, taking him to court, if you think about it. So that is going to be his great challenge. He's got no real capacity to lead. But you could tell there he's really paranoid about, gaining power and then having to be accountable to deliver stuff.
And to have a record.
And have a record on delivery, which then, will come under scrutiny.
Carla, what's your response to what we've just heard?
Well, I'll start by saying 2 things you'll probably be quite surprised to hear, which is that
I'm interested.
Nigel Farage is right about one thing, which is that there is very little love for Labour or the Conservatives out there on the doorsteps. People are feeling still pretty pissed off with the 14 years of the Conservatives, but pretty let down by the Labour government so far. They stood on a platform of change, and what they've ended up offering is tinkering around the edges at best, or the wrong kind of change. There are people considering voting reform, but a lot of people that we've been speaking to on the doorsteps don't just want to vote a protest vote for reform and vote for more division. They want to vote for hard-working Greens. And that's where I'm going to say the second surprising thing, which is that I agree with Nadeem that reform...
I love it. Breaking out, agreement.
That reform have no track record of actually running things, whereas we Greens, we've already got over 800 councillors. We're already running, either alone or in cooperation with other parties, over 40 councils across England and Wales. We do have that track record, and I'm expecting to do quite well in these local elections. In places where we already have a significant Green representation, people like what they see, and they're telling us that they want to vote for more of it.
I should just say apologies if anyone was offended by some of the language used there.
Apologies.
We all know how passionate we all are about politics. It's really interesting to hear both of your take. And yeah, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting you to come on and be like, actually, I agree with Nigel.
About one thing.
What's it going to be? New coalition with Greens and Reform?
The other thing that's helping Nigel, and you see it today at PMQs, is Labour's Achilles heel, as it was ours, is illegal migration. People see that as long as you don't have a deterrent, and we were racing towards a deterrent with the Rwanda policy. Obviously, Keir came in, scrapped that. He's now going to pay the price for that. And I think if he doesn't U-turn soon, he's going to have a real problem. The Labour Party are going to have a serious, serious difficulty, and Nigel will be the great beneficiary of it.
Really interesting to hear from. Do you want to come? Go on.
Well, we're done with agreeing now. I am really worried by Labour continuing to dance to Reform's tune on immigration, really scapegoating migrants, failing to recognise the positive contribution they bring to this country, and failing to recognise that if you want to tackle the small boats crisis in the Channel, then you need to take away their business model, and you do that by giving legitimate asylum seekers, and the vast majority of people who come here to claim asylum are successful, they are legitimate asylum seekers, give them safe routes to apply and to arrive by regular routes, and then there will be no business model for the small boats.
Carla, there's a clue in the word, illegal. right? You know, my parents came to these shores, right? Most immigrants watching tonight, right, whatever, who came here, followed the rules, did it properly, are equally upset about people jumping the queue, getting on small boats.
Are you suggesting that asylum seekers are by definition illegal because you've misunderstood the Refugee Convention, if so?
I'm saying to you that you are not understanding how the nation feels. Every constituency, my old seat, Stratford-on-Avon, had hotels full of illegal young men who've come across on these boats, exploited by gangs, no doubt, but it's illegal.
I need to clarify something.
And that is the problem the Greens will have with the nation. Go and try and explain that to the country. They won't understand it.
People fleeing for their lives, fleeing from political oppression, have a right to apply for asylum, and they have that right even if they have arrived irregularly. There is...
You can't even say the word illegal, right?
Because applying for asylum is not illegal.
No, what they're doing is illegal.
In the Refugee
they are
Convention.
coming from a safe country, which is France. They're coming from a safe country, which is France. They're crossing illegally. Fine, some of them being exploited by gangs. But it's illegal. The nation hates that because it goes against our values of fairness. That's the real problem. And that is what Nigel and Kemi are talking about.
The vast majority of people on small boats are coming, fleeing their lives, fleeing from political oppression, fleeing from war. They apply for asylum when they arrive.
They're in a safe country in France.
And the majority of them are successful.
What are they fleeing from France?
And the majority of them are successful because their right to refugee status is recognised.
What are they fleeing from France? It's a safe country.
The Refugee Convention does not require them to seek asylum in the first country they arrive in.
The nation will decide your fate.
You know what?
On that point.
Well, I represent a constituency that is incredibly pro-migration. It's a city of sanctuary.
I'm the son of
my
immigrants.
constituents in Bristol Central want
I am
the
the son
UK
of
to support
immigrants,
migrants.
right? It goes against our sense of fair play and fairness.
I tell you what, it was really nice, wasn't it, when we had a little bit of agreement for about 2 minutes. That lasted a long time. But really, really interesting debate from both of you. Thank you. Right, there you are. Right, I've also been speaking to the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, tonight. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Well, it's actually quite a unique set of local elections because the elections that are happening tomorrow are primarily in county councils, in the shires that have been run by the Conservatives. We don't run any of those county councils, and so I think it's going to be as much a verdict on Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Conservative Party as anything else. We're obviously going to be fighting for every single vote. It is really important who is running public services in our councils and mayoral combined authorities, but it is quite an odd mixture of different types of elections tomorrow.
As you say, it is kind of a weird mix. The thing that I am really going to be looking out for from them is reform, because it feels to me like this is a big test about whether they can convert votes into seats. And if they do manage that at council level, then that obviously has an impact on the general election as well. How much of a threat are reform to Labour?
So, look, I think people need to be clear what they're voting for if they're considering voting for reform, because
that's an answer with respect to a completely different question. How much of a threat is reform to Labour?
So, look, I go out door knocking every week in my own constituency, and my personal experience has been that the polling results that you see reported in the news isn't reflected in the conversations that you have.
What's your constituency?
So I represent Swindon in Wiltshire, so it was a seat that I won off of the Conservatives in July of last year. It was a seat where Reform came third. And so, you know, my experience is that the poll numbers aren't necessarily reflected on the doorstep.
So
but what I would say is that, you know, people that are considering voting for reform, they need to be, you know, clear what they're voting for. You know, Nigel Farage's party is a party that will insist that you whip your credit card out when you get to the door of A&E, or that you take a bank loan out if you want to have your hip replaced.
Can I make an observation? Because whenever I ask Labour MPs about reform, every Labour MP comes to me with that line on the NHS, which makes me feel that that is a number 10 line. And that makes me feel that Labour are worried about reform, that number 10 are worried about reform, and that they're telling you the lines to take.
I'm just telling you the truth, Sophie. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you the truth about what reforms stand for. I could also tell you.
You're telling me about the NHS thing because that's been polled by number 10 as damaging to Nigel Farage, and I'm not saying whether it's true or not.
Also, because Nigel Farage has stood up and said he wants to move to an insurance-based health system.
I'm not disputing that, but I guess what I am disputing is that I do think Labour are worried about reform. That's fair enough, like you've got a very broad but shallow coalition. You're facing reform in an awful lot of seats. It'll be natural. They're leading the polls.
So
There's no shame in it.
We fight for every single vote, and I will always be honest about what my opponents are standing for, and I'm just being honest with you about that. I would also say, if you look at the candidates that Reform were fielding before the general election last year, making racist comments, things about Rishi Sunak, who was then the Prime Minister, and I've got no love lost between me and Rishi Sunak, but I do think he was completely right when he stood up and said that his daughters shouldn't have to grow up in a country where people who are standing for public office are using such vile and racist language. And we actually saw Nigel Farage sort of having to distance himself from that. But those are the types of people who are standing as candidates for the Reform Party. They had, 4 or 5 MPs in the House of Commons. One of them's already been booted out. So they're fighting like rats in a sack at the moment. I would say that if people are considering how they're going to vote at the election tomorrow in these council elections, vote for a serious party that's committed to improving the delivery of public services in your area and will be able to work with the Labour government to bring about the change that people undoubtedly want to see.
Who's more of a threat, Reform or the Conservatives?
Well, the Conservatives seem to not even be on the pitch in some of these elections, and what we don't know is about these sort of grubby backroom deals that they seem to be doing between one another. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, was recorded recently, wasn't he, as saying that he, potentially wants to, go into coalition with Reform or something like that. And so people don't really know what they're voting for. If you're voting for Conservative, you might be getting Reform. If you're voting for Reform, you might be getting Conservative. And so, I think that politics is quite volatile at the moment. I do accept that, and we're working very hard to deliver on that change that people want. We came into the general election saying that one of our big priorities was things like getting the NHS waiting list down. We've done that for 6 months in a row now, getting the economy started. And so these are the things that people, are going to be making their mind up when they go. I
probably should say that Robert Jenrick says he talked about coalition of voters rather than coalitions of reform, but, people, I'm sure, can look at those comments and make up their own minds as well. I just wanted to talk to you about net zero now, because Tony Blair, former Prime Minister, of course, has written today saying that voters feel they're being asked to make financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle when they know the impact on global emissions is minimal. He's also saying about the way that we're kind of moving away from fossil fuels. Too often, political leaders fear saying what many know to be true, the current approach isn't working. Do you agree with him?
So, Tony has been also clear today that he thinks that the UK government's approach to the transition to net zero is the right one.
Can I come back on that? Because I've looked at this and I think that he's been very specific on what he's talking about. So the spokesperson from the Tony Blair Institute says that the report's clear. We must prioritise technologies that capture carbon, place a bigger emphasis on protecting and enhancing nature, develop new nuclear power grids. And then he says the UK government is already pursuing these and their approach is the right one. So he's saying that you've got the right approach on these things, but I don't think he's saying that the entire net zero approach is right. That feels to be a slightly different thing. He's saying, isn't he, that yes, it's right to focus on these renewable energies and the transition to net zero, but we need to be careful about moving too quickly away from other sources of energy. That's what he's saying, isn't it?
But that is the government's approach, because if you look at the commitments we've made about issuing new licence for exploration of oil and gas in the North Sea, we've said that we won't issue new ones, but of course there are many licences that are already in place. And we're not talking about an immediate end to the use of fossil fuels. we've always been clear that it's going to be a phased and responsible transition. Tony is not talking about us resiling from our 2050 commitment, our legally binding commitment to achieving net zero. He is right to say, though, that we should apply pragmatism and logic. We should meet people where we are.
The head of Unite doesn't agree with you on this. She thinks that you are moving too quickly away. Sharon Graham coming out saying that your net zero plan is failing to deliver jobs. Working class people are losing their jobs. This government has no plan to replace them. They're in particular not happy at the closure of the Grangemouth refinery.
So if you look at some of the decisions that I've taken in my role as Transport Secretary, we've introduced new flexibilities to something called the Zero Emission Vehicles Mandate, which is about the transition to electric vehicles. We've said that people can still buy hybrid cars, plug-in hybrids, full hybrids, things like the Toyota Prius, through until 2035. We maintain the phase-out date for the new sale of electric and diesel cars in 2030, but we have given car manufacturers additional flexibilities in order to be able to get to that point in 2030. Okay. And that is really important for jobs in the automotive sector. I've spoken to a lot of the big car manufacturers. We listened to what they were saying and we've acted on that because we recognise that actually it's important that we've got those jobs, those high-skilled jobs, well-paying jobs, but it's got to be in the industries of the future, and things like electric vehicles are exactly that.
There's so much more we could talk about on this subject, but there is one other thing that I want to ask you about while we've got you, and that's graduated driving licences ahead of the road safety strategy. So there has been calls for stricter rules to come in after you've just passed your test, whether it's the number of passengers you can have in the car, the time of day or night you can drive at. And it's particularly, I guess, heartfelt at the minute because of a case on Monday when a teenage driver was sentenced after 3 of his friends died when there were passengers in his car. And the judge said that if there had been restrictions on the number of people newly qualified drivers can have, then that wouldn't have happened. And I just want to play you a grab of someone called Juliet. She's the mum to one of the girls who died, Tilly. Let's just have a listen to what she had to say.
Birthdays, the anniversaries, everything, and just being a mother, you feel lost when you've lost one of your children. If you're not willing to go down the graduated driving licences route, no action and procrastination is not good enough anymore.
It's a really difficult... I know how difficult it is. What's your instinct on graduated driving licences?
So, first of all, my heart goes out to the family there, and every death or serious injury on our roads is a tragedy, and in no other sphere of activity would we think it was acceptable that 1,600 people are killed and that we don't do anything about it. And that is why this government will be bringing forward the first road safety strategy in 10 years. With regard to graduated driving licences, which would restrict the number of passengers a newly qualified driver could take, that is not something we are considering. This is a really difficult issue. I remember when I passed my driving test, and one of the great joys was being able to take my friends in the back of the car, and there are a lot of people who behave responsibly, and what we shouldn't be doing is penalising those people who are behaving responsibly. Having said that, I do want to look at what measures we can take to reduce danger on our roads. Young people are disproportionately affected by road collisions. And so this is something that the Future of Roads Minister and I, Lillian Greenwood, are committed to looking at, and we will bring forward that new road safety strategy.
I guess what some might say about graduated driving licences is it's not just about penalising those who are responsible, but that you might just not be that as experienced a driver, right? When you just pass your test. It's only kind of by getting the miles and you become better as a driver. So it might not just be about whether you're acting responsible, just about whether you've got the experience in order to be putting other lives at risk.
There are a whole range of different things that you could do. Restrictions on having people in the car is one element of it. We are going to look at a whole range of options. And when you talk about road safety, You know, it's important we think holistically about it. I did some work in London on bringing something forward called the Vision Zero strategy, and that was about saying that really the only acceptable number of deaths on the road is zero, and that you should aim for that. And we focus there on a whole range of things. Yes, sort of safe behaviours, but also about safe speeds, about safety in vehicles themselves, about designing streets safely as well. And so we need to do a proper piece of work on this. It hasn't been updated for 10 years. I don't think that is acceptable, and that is why it will be a priority of this government to bring forward a proper, holistic new road safety strategy.
OK, thank you very much. Heidi Alexander there, and of course the English elections are sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor Kevin Maguire and the Telegraph's comment editor Annabelle Denham. Right, let's chat again, shall we, to Nadeem and Carla. It's such an emotive topic of graduated driving licences, and people will have different opinions on it as well. Carla, what's your take on it?
Well, that was an incredibly sad piece, hearing from the mum whose child had died. One of my school friends unfortunately killed himself on the road not long after passing his tests. So
I'm sorry, that's really awful thing to have happened.
Yeah, it was the first funeral I attended. So I absolutely empathise with people who are in that horrible situation. But like Heidi, I'm wondering about unintended consequences of such a policy, because when I first passed my test, I had passengers in the car because my granny, who'd had a couple of strokes and needed quite a lot of looking after, and my mum had a full-time job. So quite a lot of the driving that I did in the first few months after I passed my test was actually driving my granny to the shops and looking after her. And I would worry about unintended consequences of banning young people from having passengers, meaning that they can't do many of the things that may have been why they wanted to get the driving licence in the first place. I do agree with Heidi Alexander that the only acceptable number of deaths on our roads is zero, and we should be pursuing policies to try and achieve that. And that is around behaviours, but it's also around designing our road networks in a way that reduces the number of times that vehicles and pedestrians are in conflict. And I think that there's a lot that local councils can do, but they are going to need the funding and the policy support to do that right. In fact, there's also stuff around pavement parking, which can reduce visibility and force pedestrians into the road. That is a particular bit of work that I've been working on this week, trying to push the government, because there's a much delayed report out on that too. So I'll be really eager to read this road safety report and see what they're planning.
Yeah, really interesting. And thanks for sharing your story. I'm sorry about what happened to your friend. Nadeem, briefly, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I'm just obviously listening to Carla, and my heart goes up. I mean, I remember, again, there's 4 school friends, actually, who were victims of road accidents
in your
right after school.
well.
Absolutely. On Kingston Hill, the driver, the passenger, and actually the boy in the back was maimed for life, and then another school friend on a motorbike on Tibbetts Roundabout.
So
awful, and terrible. And you sort of think, state intervention with seatbelts has been a massive success. Nobody today would argue that was wrong. I think I agree with Carla. The unintended negative consequences of limiting passengers, I would worry about. I hope that some of the new technology that's coming through on vehicle safety and driverless vehicles, there's some incredible stuff being done now. We will very soon have autonomous vehicles, which will, again, hopefully be a bit like aeroplanes, where fly-by-wire, you'll have drive-by where the actual car takes over if there is an imminent collision or accident. So some of this stuff technology might solve some of these problems.
It's really interesting and thoughtful discussion. Thanks both very much indeed. Now, fresh from celebrating the first 100 days of his second presidency, Donald Trump began day 101 having to digest some bad news for the US economy. As GDP shrank by 0.3 percentage points in the first quarter of the year, that's the worst performance for 3 years. But Donald Trump said it's not his fault.
Core GDP, and this is, you probably saw some numbers today, and I have to start off by saying that's Biden. That's not Trump, because we came in on January, this is the quarterly numbers, and we came in and I was very against everything that Biden was doing in terms of the economy, destroying our country in so many ways, not only at the border was more obvious, but we took over his mess in so many different ways.
Well, let's speak to our US correspondent, David Blevins, who's in Washington for us. The US economy, perhaps more than anything, is what's going to have an impact on Donald Trump's presidency, right?
Oh, absolutely right. And this is really bad news for Donald Trump. The economy having shrunk 0.3% in the first quarter. It's the first drop in 3 years, Sophie. But predictably, he was very quick to say this is Biden's market. His problem with saying that is that last November, just before the election, when the economy was much more buoyant, Donald Trump posted online, this is Trump's market, suggesting that it was because the polls were indicating he was going to win back the White House. Now, the Democrats are having none of this. An aide to the former president, Joe Biden, has warned today of Trump's cession. He says Donald Trump inherited the best economy in the world, and no other president in history has put it into a nosedive in the space of 100 days. It was a rather rare intervention by Andrew Bates, who is an aide, as I say, of Joe Biden. And we're going to have another rare intervention later this evening when we hear from a woman called Kamala Harris. We've not heard a lot from her since she left office, having lost the race to the White House to Donald Trump. And we can bet our bottom dollar she's going to talk about the economy, because a shrinking economy is a gift, albeit an unwelcome one, for a Democratic Party that has been struggling to find a strategy to unite around in its battle to take on Donald Trump.
That will be fascinating to hear that one. David Blevins, thank you very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. With a day to go before polls open in the local elections, Keir Starmer probably could do without having to talk about Tony Blair's views on net zero and how Blair believes limiting fossil fuels is doomed to fail. We're looking at when former Prime Ministers stick their oars in. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, outrage amongst armed police officers as the marksman cleared of murdering Chris Cabba is told he now faces gross misconduct proceedings. I'm going to speak to a former armed officer who also went on trial over a fatal shooting. Also ahead tonight, video allegedly showing 2 men cutting down the Sycamore Gap tree has been released. And daunting and at times frightening, the King's very personal account of his experience of cancer. All that and much more to come on the UK Tonight from 8.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
a young American medical student, is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
The Premier League run-in is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock, with crucial fixtures in the race for Europe. Saturday, Arsenal look to finish strong against Bournemouth.
Expect the unexpected.
Sunday, exclusively on Peacock, Champions League hopefuls Chelsea take on the Premier League champions Liverpool. This is the Premier League run-in, live on NBC and Peacock.
Hello, good evening. Well, on the eve of the local elections, the former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair has hit the headlines, accused of slagging off the flagship Labour Party policy and manifesto commitment to net zero. And of course, it's not the first time the former Prime Minister has made a political intervention.
I don't think you're ever going to get a situation where, decisions are perfectly taken in perfect circumstances.
Many people, as a result of what's happened in Afghanistan, are going to have a deep doubt as to whether we can be relied upon. The deal that the Prime Minister's finally concluded with Europe is a deal that no one really wants. So I think the logical thing is to go back to the people and say, you're going to have to give us direction. We're ignoring what the international community has said, which is that this is unacceptable and those that use such methods should be held to account, and we're giving carte blanche for future use of chemical weapons.
You're saying vote Labour, you are saying I want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
I don't think that's the real issue in this election. I think the real issue is blank check. It's really important to distinguish between a coalition that is a marriage of conviction and a coalition that's a marriage of convenience.
All right, let's bring in Nadeem and Carla, shall we? I've interviewed a few former Prime Ministers now, and I find it quite fascinating because there are some who they just can't let the politics go. And I don't mean that in, I don't mean that in a, disparaging way, because they, people like Tony Blair obviously feel they still have things to contribute to the debate, but he certainly has got that itch you can't shake off. Or Nadeem?
Look, I mean, he's probably been one of the most successful Prime Ministers post-office. In having an incredible career globally, advising governments around the world. Tony Blair work that, this report has been something that has made the weather today, right? Mm-hmm. In many ways, pun unintended, on climate change. But nevertheless, I think it's unhelpful, obviously, for Keir and the team, especially the evening before local elections. But at the same time, I think he makes a very serious point, which we sort of talked about earlier, that the nation agrees with him. 74% of people think that we won't hit net zero by 2050. 70% of Labour voters don't think we'll.
We're about to crack. I'm getting told in my ear we've got like 25 seconds. Go, Carla. What's your?
Well, the shadow of Tony Blair is very long, isn't it? The sense of déjà vu from the previous Labour government that took us into the Iraq war, that ignored 1 million people protesting, saying no. It feels like it's been happening all over again with Gaza. I think there's going to be another generation of people saying never again with the Labour Party after this.
Thanks both very much. Busy show, passionate show, love it. See you tomorrow.